Dog Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Dog Slab Audio and our 5th Master Series. I do believe this is the 17th video in our 5th Master Series, Professional Sounding Results from Your Home Studio. And in this video, we want to talk about outboard gear. So first and foremost, I want to get it straight. Two things: that I'm not a really big fan of outboard gear because it was a necessity back in the day, before we had equipment as good as we have now. And if you look at pictures of my small home studio, everything's in the box because it's not needed. Although it is cool and you can do some really neat stuff with outboard gear. Second of all, it's not scientific work we're doing, so do not get lost in outboard gear because you can just get lost in it. There is tons of outboard gear. I mean, tons of things you can buy for your studio. It is mind-boggling all the choices you have and all the things you can do with outboard gear. You can spend the whole rest of your life and every penny in your pocket dealing with outboard gear. There is no doubt about it. And when you look at, like, say, a small or medium home studio, that if you have a small home studio, professional, semi-professional, or even a medium one, that a lot of times they don't have as much gear as you might think. Sometimes you might see it on their desk or something, a few things that they like, interfaces and maybe some compressors and some other things that are helping them facilitate their workflow. But for the most part, the ideology is going to minimize that. To where before it looked like some studios, it looks like NASA in there. It is not needed, but it can be cool. There's no doubt about it. But so I'm not going to make 500 videos on outboard gear, because the bottom line is, when you go look at pictures of a studio and you see all these mountains of racks of outboard gear and these huge consoles and these completely mind-boggling setups for doing music production, it can be very intimidating, to where you think, I need all that stuff to make music. Oh my God, I can't afford all that. And it's not true. Outboard gear can be really cool to get done what you want. And the bigger you get professionally, that I do not dissuade you from setting it up like NASA if you can afford it and you have people to pay for it, or if you just got the money, want to do it just for fun, and it can make things a little bit easier sometimes also. But I mean, there is mountains of ways to do it. It's not really simple. It's not like, well, you can buy this outboard gear and that outboard gear, You can spend, everybody's got an opinion, and there's bazillions of different ways to do it. So the biggest concept to dealing with outboard gear is most of the stuff you can do just in the box, okay? Besides that, the things operate on the same mentality, only it's in the digital world rather than analog world. So there is an added character being that it's analog. So keep that in mind. Also, the better you understand it, that there are other things you can do with outboard gear. Does that make sense? That you can still do in the box, but differently. So you really want to keep in mind, it comes down to what you want to do, how you want to do it, and what you're going to need to accomplish that, and your goals as a home studio, semi-professional, or professional studio, because you can just get lost in it. And I really dissuade you from doing that, because I've seen so many people not focusing on the music and their engineering and getting lost, that they need all this stuff that they just don't. It's ridiculous. Does that make sense? So that is my humble opinion, but that's my opinion. I could build you a studio with all kinds of outboard gear that is just cool. So just keep in mind, don't get lost there. The better you get as an engineer in the box with very limited outboard gear, the better able you'll be able to deal with that when you become a really good engineer and a better engineer and decide, now I want to buy those preamps. Now I want to buy this. Now I want to buy that compressor. Now I want to buy that outboard effect. Now I want to buy that mixing console. Now I want to buy this. Because I've come to the point in my engineering that I can really understand how that can be really cool for my workflow and the way I do things to help me facilitate what I want to do and how I'm going to get that done. But not before then is my suggestion. So that's my 2 cents on that. Besides that, when we get in there, besides looking at outboard gear is pretty simple. That what we're dealing with here as far as outboard gear. It can get really complicated the more things you go on to do, but for the most part, it's pretty simple. And you're going to want to do some reading, on outboard gear, history of outboard gear. What does that mean? Historically, they had to have outboard gear. It's not like now. Now the digital world is master. Does that make sense? Whereas the analog world is sub. Does that make sense? And that's just reality. And when you get into reading about getting started with outboard gear and take your time. Don't be in a hurry to losing yourself in that and losing your pocketbook in that before you're really ready to commit to that kind of stuff. And then if and when you do, you get into things like mixing consoles. Do some really good research about what all is happening there and what all it's going to do for you outside of the box. That's going to help facilitate what you want to do or get done what you want to do. Same things with your microphone, preamplifiers, anything that's boosting levels for headphone speakers, anything like that. Check into it. You get into things like outboard equalizers, outboard compressors, outboard limiters, noise gates, reverberation, delays, any kind of outboard effects that you're going to be sending and returning and things like that. Get into that. The other outboard gear we talked about a little bit before in the last video, word clocks, and we get into word clocks and all the stuff like that has to do with MIDI and all the connection stuff to try to bridge these things together is something you're going to want to read about this stuff as you expand. But don't be in a hurry to do that, because you'll probably find once you master in the box and you master the audio engineering and you really understand the difference between analog signals, digital signals, and what the difference between there and the processing types of what's happening there, to where in the end that you've got a really comprehensive understanding of what's going on there, so that when you come out of the box a little bit after really understanding these concepts, that you will be able to formulate really good understandings of why would I want to have this small mixing console or this big mixing console or this outboard preamp or this outboard compressor or limiter or this outboard echo box delay or this other thing that I'm routing for this networking thing I'm trying to do, or I'm going to expand my studio and I'm making a recording room or a listening room or whatever you're trying to do and however you're trying to get that done. As you become a really good engineer, you'll start branching out. You will start to see that you will understand what value that actually has to you, looking at it that way as an informed consumer and an informed engineer, because you're already a pretty good engineer. So when you start looking at things like outboard gear and you start for what you want to do in your size studio and the goals that you have, that you can make really good decisions about the outboard gear that you're going to want and how that is going to help and facilitate what you want to do, not a minute before that. Because if I get lost in 10, 15, 20 videos about outboard gear, I could, because outboard gear can be cool. But there's so much of it, and there's so many different ways to do it for so many different things that can be just a little bit intimidating, instead of going about it the other way, where I'm trying to help you go, okay, get your head in the box. What are you trying to do? What piece of outboard gear do you really need to help you get going? And once you get going, you become a fairly decent engineer and producer that you can augment your outboard gear in any way you want and incorporate outboard gear that is going to actually be helpful. Like I've got a pretty small audio interface, so I've got a preamplifier. I was like, okay, well, I know what that does. I have a pretty good idea what it does, and yeah, I do have a use for that because of my mic or my whatever I'm doing, that a preamp is actually going to be helpful. Where for a long time, I've been studying audio engineering for a long time, and it's like, until I actually really understood engineering, would have been no need for me to buy any of that stuff because it would have been useless to me. It would have been a waste of time when I should have been focusing on my engineering skills and my production skills. And then when it become useful, then, oh, I want to do that. That mixer would be cool, or that thing would be cool, or that preamp, or that compressor would be cool, or that oscilloscope, or whatever that I was going to buy as outboard gear, and no matter what I was doing, actually had value. Instead, it was just something, that I was muddling around with when I could have just been doing it in the box until I became a pretty good engineer, till it was really helping me. I want to do this kind of music. I want to do it like that. These are the different situations I might be in that might be helpful to me too, and I can make really good decisions about why I would want that compressor or two compressors. I might want three different, outboard compressors, or two or three different outboard limiters, or two or three different outboard preamps, in between gear, things that are routing things between different things to get things done, because you can sometimes mess around with routing and get different sounds. It'll sound different the way you route things when you start connecting outboard gear. So it can get a little complicated, but without being a pretty good engineer and understanding all of these things, you can just get lost in it. And when you should be focused on your production and your engineering skills, understanding what you're dealing with and understanding, analog and digital world really well, so that when you go start making those things, it's not that big a deal. You decide once you got pretty good and you really get your studio set up, you've got a small home studio, you're going to branch out a bit, you want a preamp, you want an outboard compressor, maybe a couple outboard compressors, maybe a different effects rack for, doing delays or doing reverb and echo effects or whatever. And by that time, you've done some productions and you know why you would want that, not just, oh, that would be cool to have, and Bob said I need that because, Bob's a master engineer. He's looks like Star Trek inside his house, bro. But you may not need that, or you might see it differently, where he was like, wow, love that compressor, and you'd be like, I have no need for it. I do it right here with my compressor in the box, and that's fine for me. Does that make sense? But it might not be, and you might choose a different compressor that has a little bit different flavor or taste that's affecting the analog signal that's going through there, because have no doubt the different ones do affect the analog signal differently, and as it routes through all the other analog gear you have outside the box, that it changes the sound. And those things you're going to want to understand and research about thoroughly whenever you decide to buy a piece of outboard gear. So that's my 2 cents on that. So whenever you're dealing with outboard gear, trying to get professional sounding results, deal with it as it becomes something that is actually useful and helpful for you, that you can understand really well, because you really understand your production layout, and your engineering layout, and what you're trying to do, and how you're trying to do that, and how that would really be helpful. And then really start picking apart the details about which ones you might want that are going to sound better for the way you do things and the way you like things and the sound you like and your personal preference and things like that. And lastly, keep in mind, gear is pretty good nowadays, so don't get lost into one piece of outboard gear so much better than another outboard piece of gear, because it probably isn't. It might be a little different, but the equipment nowadays is really good, and for doing music productions, it's overkill and redundant a lot of times. I mean, almost guaranteed. So don't get lost in that whenever you're dealing with outboard gear. Take it one step at a time, and you working out of the box, and you really know, after working through some productions and working through some projects, and you're getting pretty good as an engineer, why you would need that piece of outboard gear and what is actually going to get done for you, and understand it really well. You know, understand the piece of equipment really well, understand the differences between it and 500 different pieces of analog gear that are just like it but made by somebody else, and why you'd want a specific one. Take your time there, because a lot of that outboard gear is for life. And, you know, I mean, it'll be with you the rest of your life. And don't make stupid decisions, or I should say, you know, hasty decisions about that kind of stuff. Take your time, don't be in a hurry, and really research what you're getting into. And don't think you can't just get a radio ready production done in a box, that you need a bunch of outboard gear. Really have a reason to start looking at it and make good decisions, make good purchases, and make informed decisions and purchases about how you want to do things and what you want to do, and how that outboard gear is going to help you do that. So peace, self-love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video on outboard gear in our 5th Master series, and I will see you in the next video.